Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in today. I'm Scott here with my co-host Tevi. Tevi, how are you doing today?
Hey Scott. Actually, interestingly, I'm a little under the weather, and I was thinking today, I was wondering if people actually take their days off for sick days more when they're at home or more when they're in the office. And the other side is maybe people work through while they're working from home, but maybe they actually rest in the middle of the day as well. I'm curious what you guys are doing. Here I am working, but feeling okay right now. I'm curious what you guys think. What do you think people do for sick days when they're working from home?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. There is this, we had to write at some point in our handbook and to actually send a note during the winter. People go see a doctor. Everybody was freaked out to get outside. But yeah, 100%, I think people open their laptop, start to work, even if they say, maybe I'll take it easy today. They just end up doing like a regular all day of work.
I'd agree on that line. You're saving yourself a 30 plus commute, whether driving or taking transportation, being physically tired, versus you just sit in your bed. How many times that I'm feeling perfectly well, but I work from the bed? I'll throw that out there and be honest. So I think there's definitely that likelihood when you're working remotely to push more because you're in your home, you're more comfortable, you have access to no tea or the bathroom or things that you may need. You're able to work in a more comfortable environment where you don't have as much pressure as you would potentially in an office. I don't know, Teddy, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I was just wondering about it today. Like, here I am working, but I'll probably take a break if I have to. I don't know if it's better. I guess my question is, like, is it better to say that we work from home, but then if we end up working through instead of taking the time off that we need, maybe that's bad. So maybe people just need to be careful and be aware of like how they feel and if they're taking care of themselves.
I give you a blessing to drop off at any time. We could record the audio separately and we could try to get creative with some deepfakes. But I do have to admit I am not a professional editor or producer, so the deepfakes may look less like deepfakes and more like a 1970s or 80s kung fu video. So it's up to you, but to kind of get us back on track, today is the fourth and the final episode in our series about asynchronous communication. What is it, why use it, and the tools to be successful at it. So far, we've learned about the foundations of async and how to do it from day one, how to merge together the best of both synchronous and asynchronous worlds, and how to pivot to doing your one-on-ones async. So today, we're happy to be joined by Christophe, who is the CEO and co-founder of Slite. Slite is a collaborative documentation tool for teams, and basically a place where your team can share ideas and collaborate on them in real time. And Christophe, usually the way that we start off is introducing yourself a little bit more and telling us a little bit about the origin story of Slite.
Slite, which is more than event documentation, it's a communication tool for remote and async teams. We started at Create as a note-taking app for teams more than 4 years ago. The originality was really simple. We had Slack that were exploding and we wanted to do the same as they did for communication in teams by bringing the UX of a B2C tool like Messenger or WhatsApp in the hands of enterprise. And we wanted to do the same for their knowledge management and their writing. And so we just built something that looked like Apple Notes that was as simple and as flexible. And we brought it into Teams. So by default, we were making the notes accessible to all the teammates. We saw like teams churning from Confluent. Like the biggest one, like the surprise was like released a little bit less than 1 year and we had a team of 80 people churning from Confluent to Slide. I learned at the time the term of knowledge base. And by granularity, we went to not taking up to more than a knowledge base. We also learned that like all the horror story of teams like trying to use knowledge base, and it's a mess because it's never maintained, it's actually never used. And we basically try to educate the teams that are looking for knowledge base to work by writing and to give them a communication tool rather than a knowledge base.
Nice. It looks like your team is mostly in Europe, but also scattered around not just France and Germany, but also Canada or in Argentina as well, like pretty far away. Can you tell us a bit about the communication culture at Slite and how you stay connected?
So it was one of the challenges. We obviously knew that we were working for this team very early on. We were ourselves remote, but like we were like physically like separated by a bit less than 200 kilometers for a long time. Like it was obviously very French people in France, even if they are not all in Paris. We went to YC and raised a seed round in 2018. And when we came back, we started to expand the team for the first time from 8 people. And we wanted to find great talents. And we said, okay, let's just remove any constraints about like we have just an entity in France, in the US or whatever. We'll figure it out. Let's just find anybody anywhere in the world. So the first 2 folks that we hired this way were one in Sao Paulo and the both incredibly talented folks. We just knew that we wanted to work with them if they were willing to try it out. What it pushed us to do was to build the foundation of our culture, which is basically everything by default is logged in slides. Most of the projects start with a document. It's obviously something that we try to share as a best practice because it works incredibly well. We do one-ones with everybody in our teams very, very frequently. I still do one-one with everybody every month. The one-ones are very much like a link to radical candor style. They are a place to create human relationship and to make sure that the human aspect of the work is going well, like the motivation and is there enough empathy and do you understand why you do things and so on. That's a very, very big one and that we try to spread to the new managers. We even have coach dedicated to the managers to work the right way. And the last one, which is, it has been an incredible challenge. We use together almost every 2 months. For the 2 people in Sao Paulo and Seoul, we literally asked them every 2 months to fly to Paris, which was a lot to be asked. Hopefully they were already excited about this. It was still new, right? So it was like nobody was doing that. So we were still excited to try that. Today, we wouldn't ask that, but we still try together at least every 4 months. And we give the possibility to teams to travel in between if they want among teammates.
Not a scheduled question that I had, but in the last year and a half, many of the startups that are building remote tools or remote companies that I've met, mentored, coached, whatever, are coming from France and Germany. You're from France. Any insight into why Western Europe seems to be an epicenter for the growing remote work movement?
That's really interesting. I didn't catch this signal myself. I guess there is logical explanation here, but it's interesting. I try to double cross check the facts in my head about like the companies that I know that I enrolled. I guess like the big thing about the remote European founders have really 2 choices if they want to make a big company, right? They move to SF and New York. And even in my case, we went to YC, the choice was to stay there. I already worked in a 9 hours delay environment and it's very hard. It's very intense.
That seems to be the point that I've heard consistently is French founders or German founders understand that in Paris or Berlin, there's a certain number of great developers, UX people, whatever it may be. And unless they're curing cancer or getting somebody to Mars, they're simply not going to be able to recruit them from Facebook or Google or wherever they're working. So they know from day one, in order to build a large, successful company, they have to go remote first. So it's definitely been interesting to me to see many of these companies that are launching the last 18 months have been coming out of France and Germany, the ones I've spoken to with that same sense of, hey, we understand it's just a business necessity. We have to do this from day one in order to be able to grow and to be successful.
In France, at least, was French founders coming to SF and then splitting the team like sales and commercial, whatever, like business side, staying to SF in New York City and the developers and the product staying in France. And they were just having 2 headquarters. I guess it changes because 2 headquarters is a lot to handle. But I'm curious, when you say that at the same time, the big names of remote before 2015, let's say, so Zapier, Envision, Automatic, Ghost, Buffer, are all, I believe, US, right? American. It is because you both work there. What explained this?
I think the Envision story being remote was the back end of the system, and again, this is coming from my 2 cents, the back end of the system was built on Cold Fusion, and Cold Fusion was going to be the next big back end tech stack that never was. So you only had a finite number of developers that knew how to write Cold Fusion, and they were spread out all over the US and maybe perhaps the rest of the world. You'd probably have to get the CEO or CTO on to confirm this, but from what I got out of it, the founding was you had a limited amount of people spread across the country, then knew how to write in Cold Fusion, and the only way you're going to continue building your product was by simply being remote and being able to access the best person wherever they are. That was certainly one of our mantras at the beginning, was wherever the best talent is, whether it's a marketing person, whether it's a salesperson, whether it's a designer, we'll take them wherever they are. And I think our second UX person was in British Columbia, who then moved to Scotland because his wife was getting an MBA, and then I think he moved to London or back. So we just want the best person that we can get. But yeah, a lot of the early companies started US only and then grew out from there.
I think that's actually surprising when you think about it. Maybe about the tech startups trying to challenge themselves a bit more in what they build, but also in the way they build it. It's still interesting. If I were in San Francisco, I have way less pressure or way less incentive to try that. Yeah, financially, sure. Anyway, if they have the means to hire the right people in SF, there is absolutely no struggle on this end. They have access to an amazing pool of talents. Yeah, it's interesting that we're all based in the US that decided to go to remote.
I was going to say, there are lots of places that are not in the classical, like urban San Francisco, New York, Chicago areas that they don't have the same talent pool. It's more like Germany or France. I know people, their founders live in North Carolina or something, and they don't have a big talent pool. So they have to go remote if they want to find the right people. And a lot of companies started that way, where they just wanted to open up their talent pool.
Yeah, I think another thing on top of that is, outside of Doist, who's been asynchronous since day one, asynchronous hasn't been a thing within the remote world, let's say, until maybe the last 6 months, 12 months. So all of the initial remote companies were using that synchronous model, Envision included. Everybody worked basically off Eastern Seaboard time schedule. I think that was also probably part of it. If everyone's within the same, let's say, 3 time zones, you have that ability to have everyone working at least in an overlap, versus having people maybe overseas, that it's much more difficult, especially if you're not using an asynchronous first setup, which we'll dive into more here. If it was a segue to get more into that conversation, the standard was synchronous, even if you were remote. Then in the last 6-12 months, now asynchronous is one of the hot topics and moving into that. So to dig in towards that direction, in previous episodes, we've heard from other great guests about doing onboarding asynchronously, doing one-on-ones with direct reports asynchronously. So should there be any meetings that are left that are done synchronous, or really is there no more room left for synchronous conversations and meetings?
I guess it's a very black and white topic where people are very intense about it, and we are not at all at Slite. I have a lot of calls every week with my team, and I love it, but it's every time it's one person. So to us, what we say when we say async communication is basically no meetings, and every kind of long thought important topic is discussed through long form discussion straight in slides. Is there some ground rules? Today we don't have actual rules yet. We are 35 people. We are still in a lead by example type mode where we try to challenge ourselves and iterate on what we see works well and what works not so well. We try to nudge people in the right direction, say what brings synchronous communication. You want to know what people have been working on. Like you need updates to come in your way if you want to remove this kind of catch me up on what you've been up to. The second is you want to access a piece of information, just something that has been working on. So it's very simple. Either you will nudge somebody if you can't find it by yourself, or you have some place where you can just have transparent, by default accessible information to everyone. What's the status of this hire? What's the goal for this feature or whatever? And the last one is just if you have a very complex topic, you need to have a way to track the whole conversation. And actually, most of the best async remote teams have this type of place. Usually they use GitHub issues or a database of some kind of GitLab issues, which is very funny because it's literally not made for that at all. These kind of good practices. If you have information accessible by default, if you have people that share by default what they are up to every week or every 2 weeks, and if you have the long discussions that are in one place written by default, then you don't need meetings anymore. So we just don't have meetings. I personally have just one meeting every 2 weeks where we are more than 3. That's it. And to me, that's obviously perfect.
Nice. I like that's a good way to break it down where it's not just async, it's no meetings. So you're still open to talking to people one-on-one, but for sharing knowledge, you lean back on async and you don't have meetings.
Yeah. I guess it depends a lot on the type of roles. If I remember correctly, Scott, you were in support and maybe you're on product. What's the average number of meetings that you think you were having at InVision of more than 3 people in the meeting?
I don't know that I have a number on it, but I've definitely been pushing to reduce that number. Product reviews will be a video recording with the documentation on it that's shared instead of having a meeting where we go over it. I'm managing a lot of squads, so it's hard to put a number on it. I have a lot. I can't say that I'm async at all. It's probably close to maybe like 24 a week.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Yeah. There's a lot. So that's across 3 squads, though. So 3 squads, and there's a lot of overlap with other zones. So it's just a big surface area.
It resonates a lot because maybe the only person in Slides that I don't think managed to do that is our VP of product. That has 4 squads to handle and 2 PMs and 2 product designers. And for some reason, I think it's just too much information that needs to be coordinated or something. But I know that he hasn't cracked it yet.
Yeah, I'd say the number of people that I have meetings with on a weekly basis is probably close to 80. So it's a very wide surface area. Hard to make that all remote, but I'm all async what I can do to reduce that.
You say that you try to do your product brief or product reviews by writing. I think that's the first step. That's obviously what we have with Slide and that you could do with many writing tools. The idea of how can you actually replace a meeting that will last for 1 hour where you could discuss complex topic in a discussion that is long form by writing straight inside Slides that actually goes on the course of a full week instead of 1 hour where everybody is kind of absent and not paying attention and not formulating their ideas the right way. That's definitely something that we are working on today.
I will add into the mix, though, that what I've been trying to do more and more is if I have to schedule a big meeting with, let's say, 8 or 10 stakeholders to try to figure out how to move something forward, it's very hard to find a spot on the calendar where everybody will be available at the same time. So it could be a week or so lead time. Then I'll start a Slack channel around that meeting and start the conversation. And already twice now in the last few weeks, we've been able to resolve it before the meeting came up and we were able to cancel the meeting. So we are working on that. How do you think Slite helps teams succeed in an async environment? How could Slite help us abolish meetings?
It's in the product, right? Slite is a writing tool. And it's obviously a reading tool as well. The idea is to make all information accessible by writing and by default shared with the right people in your team. To come back to what I said before, you have to fall back to synchronous communication in 3 cases when info is hard to find. And in office, you will just turn to your colleague and nudge their shoulders. If information is by default accessible and the search is kick-ass, then you don't need that, and that's Slite. The second thing is that you need to get updated by default. That's the tricky bit. That's the part where, honestly, I think it's a mix of culture and team behavior. So Slide won't be enough, but you can use Slide to write long-form updates and share them to your team. You can use Slide itself, and you have a catch-up feed that kind of surface what matters for you that's been updated in your team. And the last one is the complex topics, and that's literally what we are doing. The idea is to really give you a place called discussions where you actually can open long-form discussions, have the power of Slide editor. The problem in Slack or in such tools is that you have a very small box, 200 pixels by 200 or whatever. You have no formatting, you can't embed sketches or videos or whatever. And the greatness of our editor is that not only it's very fast and nice to use, but you can sketch collaboratively inside. This kind of experience where you can be multiple writing on the tool is really important when you want to share complex ideas
100%.
and have the diagrams or mock up a feature. And in Slack, how can you do that?
Interesting. So across the multiple episodes here, the one thing we've heard pretty consistently is that at the heart of async is long form writing. And we've obviously heard it here so far in the episode. Yeah. What do you feel about long form writing makes it so essential to asynchronous communication?
I was thinking fundamentally what makes the difference. Maybe just before that, do you use in your async communication only writing, or do you use videos and audio and looms and this kind of thing?
That's a question I was going to ask you right after this one. I'm a fan of video, like using Loom or something, or even just recording a Zoom meeting where you can, let's say, share your screen and walk through a product. That's what I do for product reviews. So that facial body language, being able to pick up people's emotions is important. So I'm a fan of video and audio. I don't like WhatsApp at all in a work environment, but I like the voice note capability that it offers. If you want to leave someone a message, you could walk somewhere and leave a thought out voice note, which doesn't have to be a live phone call, which only crazy people make phone calls.
Super cool. I'm a fan of not so much audio, but video and long form text. I think video for me is definitely that opportunity to show something and display something that needs to be much more visual, again, whether it's a product spec, whether it's a prototype, whether it's a sketch, something like that. But outside of that, I'm a fan of long form text. So much, I think the WhatsApp conversation, I've got lots of friends that would voice note me, and I would always just long form text, write a paragraph long response, and then they record an 18-second audio note. Again, maybe it's just because I've always hated the phone. I just don't like the audio only method. I think if you're trying to explain something, it's not text. I think you need the face. I think you need that interaction. See the person's face, see the mannerisms, see the expressions. You'll see these hands going around to get the intent. I'm not much of an audio fan myself.
I'm relating to both. Like, I love video. I really have a problem with audio. So the kind of short answer is, why is writing so good? For the reader, it's because you can actually look at it back. And if it's a strategy or whatever thing is really important to keep track of, you need to be able to just reread it. And a video, you won't play it again. And the reason for that actually is linked. When you record a video, it's not the same effort, right? You optimize the time spent delivery. When you're doing a video, you are just spending the time shooting the video. Except if you are a YouTuber and you will spend hours on editing. When you write, you literally can spend 10 times as much as the reader time. It's a form of balance where I feel that if you are shooting a video for one person, that's fine. If you are shooting something that is mundane to 40 people, I feel that it's like taking more of their time. That you are winning a lot of time, but you are making them lose a lot of time.
Interesting. So async, I think especially with long form text, removes the engagement and collaboration between two people or a group of people. So what can teams do moving towards that async, especially long form text, to bring in the engagement, bring in that face-to-face opportunities? Again, if most of the time spent in meetings is focused around long form writing in async.
Yeah, to me, it's a mix between using video as a format first, when you are carrying like an important information, like, hey guys, we crossed this milestone, or we need to work on X and areas why it really, really matters and so on. When you are communicating this kind of information asynchronously, then using videos is definitely, like, to me, given. I think the beta is landing today. We have 4 users in Slides, something called cover videos, where you can shoot yourself like a 2-minute constraint video, record yourself and present to document, and you can ping some places in the text. It's called the reader. And so it's this kind of way of having a human face on documents. So typically we do performance review. We still have a meeting because it's so key, but just to let the person prepare beforehand, we have all the peers doing it. Then the managers consolidate it in one version. This human face on top of the document doesn't necessarily add much information, but it adds this human interaction to the async communications.
We've spoken with a number of leaders about async. Some of them referred to it as allowing you to be thoughtful and reflective. Another one said it's about letting people be flexible to work in their own way on their own time. And now you're saying that the goal could be about not having meetings. What do you think people get wrong about async?
It's not about being machines. And I do think that some founders believe that async is like that. It doesn't mean that it removes like the need to connect as to human beings, have coffee breaks, and to have this off slide as well in between where you actually in real life meet people. So that's where my definition can be quite biased, and synchronous is a spectrum, right? Even if you are in an office, you are not constantly in the same meeting room. And you have some companies where you are literally a lot in meeting rooms, and some companies where you never have meetings and there is an in between, and you just have to pick it for the right thing.
All right, so it's not just that we don't allow people to schedule meetings. We never need to talk to a person. It's just that the default, see if you could communicate first with long form and start from there.
Yeah. I'm very curious about how does that work in the company that you've been at in remote? Like, did you have like very strong set in stone type?
No, most companies I was at I started as their leadership building out product and design. So it was easier to create the cultural norms and communication norms. So we would have a weekly meeting, and one-on-ones were for sure, if you needed to talk to someone, it was no problem. But we also had people scattered really far apart across the world. So it was just the default was a lot easier to be async. We would try to work things out over email or Slack before scheduling a meeting, just because it's hard to get people on at the same time. And it wasn't like anyone felt forced into it. It's just that's just the way the company was evolving.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
In envision, we're synchronous setup from the start with. Everyone worked kind of New York time. But as I've progressed, and especially over the last 6-12 months, the companies that I mentor are usually very early stage, 5-10 employees at most. And I'm trying to embed that idea from a very early stage of being async first, long form writing first. It comes across the entire organization, because I think the future of remote work based on productivity. How are we really going to be productive? It means it needs to be based on to-dos. To-dos need to be extremely detailed to clearly understand what I need to do or what somebody in my team needs to do by a certain time. So I definitely tried to push the async first methodology into teams that I'm working with from the start, for getting everything in writing first and creating that culture early on. But on the other side, I'll ask the question for companies, leadership who are maybe listening to this episode or listening to the series here on async and are totally on board saying, okay, async, we're doing that going forward. What are the top 3 things they should be considering as they shift from a synchronous to an asynchronous first setup?
It's actually quite easy. It's just hard to convince other people to do it. You just need to embrace transparency in writing. Good writing is a method, and you have a lot of people that actually don't master it. And I'm one of them, right? I'm not a native English speaker. It takes me a lot of time to write something good. On top of that, I'm not a storyteller. I have people in my team, I have people outside that I know that just, they write something and it's just like, it's instantly like a pleasure to read. So video, once again, can be a good segue to make it a bit more enjoyable. I still think that the ultimate goal is great writing. I guess the last one is something common to every company, but it's really the one-ones as opportunity for feedback loop and not, like focused on the job and coaching managers, because it's so hard. So many managers don't know how to not ask work-related stuff, but really just how do you feel? Are you happy at work? Do you think that we are communicating the right thing? Are you aware of what's the strategy right now? All these questions that are not linked to the job of the person day to day, but just checking on the motivation and then getting the tough feedback. If you're a product builder, getting like the users that are not excited about it, you need to ask the question so that you can iterate and find the product market fit. You need to iterate to find the right kind of processes to make it work.
Yeah, I love the last point. It's upskilling managers to be able to lead remotely in the next couple of years, for remote to have a seamless transition as the future of work, and certainly why this podcast here exists for that specific sense, just to be able to share between Tevi and I our 10 years of experience of building remote teams and companies and getting amazing guests who are building great remote teams, great products to support teams. It's just getting that information out there, getting that experience, getting those use cases out there, because to me that's the biggest necessity next year or two moving forward. Any last questions, anybody?
What we are doing is not async. Do you have a better word, or have you ever thought about a better word to describe this? We fall back to remote communication when we speak about Slite. Have you thought about that, about a better word that says synchronous for all the human stuff, keep the environment to have jokes, because jokes doesn't work very well in async. You need to have a call to make them work. And for the kind of the rest, the cold stuff that deserve like a place, like where it's thoughtful, long form, use async. Have you ever thought about the wording?
The goal of async is not that you will never talk to anybody, but that it's trying to get rid of meetings. I think that the word async is confusing to people. It makes them feel like there's no control, there's too much lag between feedback.
Yeah.
So I think it needs a rebranding. I totally agree with that. I love the idea of focusing on the goal of intentional communication, reducing meetings, saving time, increasing flexibility, and more focusing on that one thing. Maybe it's a company cultural value instead of a, how we call this type of communication.
Because literally what we describe, like what we've been discussing since the beginning of this podcast, could be embraced by an office-based team.
Exactly.
And it is literally what happens in teams that have multiple HQ anyway. You can't have all the shareholders in the same room anyway because you have the NYC office that is not awake yet or whatever. It is literally something that you could consider everything that we said happen in an office environment. The only thing is they will share drinks at the end of the day, which is nice.
Jeff Bezos was very big on long form writing and would always hand out like a 6-page brief to people in meetings. They would take 20 minutes to read this before talking. Why do we all need to be in the same room to read your 6 pages of long form content and wait for everyone to catch up? That makes no sense. That should be async.
I think async is the right term for now as we kind of get through the COVID period, just because on the other side, so much of what we've heard over the last year is when companies went remote, they added endless extra meetings and sync opportunities to be able to sync up with the team. So they had to get that extra meetings, they had to get the morning check-in, the afternoon check-in, just so everyone knew what was going on and get everyone on the same page. So async is the right term for now, just to be able to separate that idea of never-ending meetings and never-ending morning status updates and things like that, and saying async, it's all writing. There's no back and forth. There's no ping pong. There's no I send you a message. I am expecting you to respond within 30 seconds, or at least get that little thing that says Notevi is typing or Christophe is typing. And if I don't, then I start getting upset. But I definitely agree that as COVID passes and remote becomes a norm and more companies are moving that, then async, the word and terminology should definitely be changed and refined into whether it's intentional communication or whatever the next mode may be. But for me, it's async is work related, whether it's meetings, whether it's briefs, whatever it may be. And synchronous is for engagement. So the team building, the one-on-one feedback. When you have to talk to a person, you want to hang out or give them feedback, that's always synchronous. Have a face-to-face, a voice. But when it's work, default to the long form writing.
I really relate to that, but that's the thing, by default, any company in the world was used to synchronous for everything. And we are saying, like, let's say async for the work, but not async for the rest. That's what confuses the message, right? So we need to find a word for precisely what you've just described, like sync for human relationship and innovation, sync for all the kind of long form discussions and all the important stuff and all the work related things.
Async and teams succeed with long form writing. Till the next episode, everybody. Have a great day.